It's about social media strategy mapping. What do I mean by maps? I don't mean geographical maps. Even though it's Talk Like a Pirate Day, I'm not talking about treasure maps. I'm also not going to talk in pirate, I'm sorry. And, but it's about diagrams or visual depictions that chart out a particular social media strategy. So you can write your social media strategy in sentence form, but wouldn't it be nice if you could just hang it on your wall and kind of point at it? And so that's what this is about, how to do that in a more advanced way. So I want to start with a simple exercise, and I need 2 volunteers to do something really simple. Okay, you and...
Me?
Yep.
Okay, by default.
Mm-hmm. Kristen, can you tell Chad one thing that you learned while you're here?
One thing that I learned while I was here. Okay, let me go through my notes.
Pull the first thing. It doesn't really. It's not.
Well, I just was in the Girl Hack session, and we talked about how blocking can be bad. If you get bad comments and you block them, it can fuel the fire.
Okay. And if she were to say that to you in the normal context of a conversation, Chad, how would you respond?
Blocking comments are bad.
With a question. And then you would elaborate on that, right?
Well, yeah, I suppose so.
And then, Chad, maybe later on you're hanging out with the guy with the sombrero, whose name I don't know, behind you.
I would never be caught in public.
What's your name? Juan. So you might tell him, hey, I just learned something interesting, even though I wasn't in the session because I was talking to Kristen. And then Juan says something to Robin, who happens to be friends with Kristen, or sitting near her at least. And she's like, you'll never believe what Chad told Juan and then told me. And before you know it, there's all sorts of conversations going on. People are talking about each other. That's how conversations and dialogue works in real life, right? It's messy. So-and-so talks to so-and-so, talks to so-and-so, talks to so-and-so. Or for another example, let's look at, that's conversation. Let's look at how economic transactions take place. Let's say Blueberry sponsors, so gives money to Podcamp Pittsburgh. Then Podcamp Pittsburgh uses that to do things like pay for their website, buy us all chicken, and maybe the website buys a link or something. This is not actually happening, I don't think. They buy a link on Bitchberg, and the person who catered to chicken has to pay for daycare so that they can go to their work. And it kind of, money goes all over the place, doesn't it? Well then, there's one final map here, which I don't have much room for, but that's okay. Who's the most egotistical person in this room?
Juan.
We'll say Juan or Kanye West, in case you don't know one. What's Juan or Kanye West's view of the world? There's them, and then there's all these little people.
Gringos.
And where's their attention focused?
Tom Cruise.
Tell us, Juan, is it on you?
See.
So all of us in this room want to have healthy economic engagements. We want to be sharing money or doing good for the world or selling our products or services. And since we're in social, we want to be socializing. We want to be having conversations. Well then, why, when we map out our strategies, does it look like this? Where instead of this saying Kanye West, it says website. And instead of these being people, it says Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, SlideShare, LinkedIn. And everything is about getting people to your website where it's on your turf and you can do what you want. This is about the most advanced social media strategies that you're seeing out there. This is the state of the social media strategy world in terms of diagramming. It looks like a bunch of people who think they're Kanye West. Or who think they're quite the opposite, but act like. So instead, what I want to talk about is, let's frickin' get rid of that. We can do better. Let's do better. So that's what I want to talk about. So to back up then and introduce myself, I'm Daniel Kotz. You can find me at danielkotz.com or on Twitter as Daniel Kotz. I live in Lancaster, so I came out. Thanks for having me. And there I co-host a weekly podcast with my friend David Moulton called The Landcast. And once a week we sit down with someone in our community and have a half-hour conversation and then broadcast that. So it's usually an artist or band or a professional or something. So I blog at Daniel Kotz, podcast at The Landcast, and then I work for an agency called YDOP. And what we do there is consult with companies, especially colleges and nonprofits, as well as medium-sized companies, and help them figure out how they can use social media strategically. And that's my full-time position there, is working on strategy with companies for social media. And by the way, is anyone here from any agency at all? Just for your benefit, we love working with agencies that really do a good job of branding. We like people who have established what the brand is all about, and then we carry that out in social media spaces. There's some tape here that's getting me caught up. So the first question is, and I've written this out, is why social media strategy maps. And we want strategies because, first of all, they maximize limited time and money, maximize limited resources. If I have a client, and I'm going to give you an example here in a little bit, a solopreneur, single person who's a consultant, works independently. She only has so much time in her day, and her budget is limited. So she knows that if she's got half an hour at most a day to spend on social media, she wants, at the end of the week, that to add up to more than the sum of its parts. She wants it to be as if she had spent 5 hours on social media instead of 2.5. So using social media strategically helps you get the most bang for your buck. It also positions you relative to other players because you know how you're using Twitter and you're not just imitating other people. It creates complete brand experiences. If someone finds you on Twitter and then on YouTube, do they have a similar experience? Do those two experiences build on each other, or do they confuse your brand in their mind? And then, why maps? First of all, they're shiny, and they're fun. They're exactly what visual thinkers like to see, and when you hear the words visual thinker, think executives, think C-level people. They promote creativity. When you're just writing out a social media strategy, you can't think in as broad terms as when you're drawing it and your arms are engaged and your hands engaged. And they also promote clear thinking because there you have it. You can't hide it in wordiness or flowery language. Here it is. This is how we're using social media. So that's why I like them and have really come to rely on them a lot. And today I want to inspire you to think how you can do better when you're developing your social media strategies. So the first thing that you need to do when you prepare to develop a social media strategy, and I really, unfortunately, don't have the time to go into this part today. We actually talked about it a little bit in an earlier session, is to start by knowing what your social media objectives are relative to your markets. Who are we going after, and what do we want? At the end of this year, think at least in 1 year time frames. At the end of this year, if our engagement in social media has done nothing more than blank, we'll be happy. So clear that up. What are you trying to get done, and who are the markets? And then also, how are you going to measure your progress along those objectives? You need to have measurable objectives. At the end of this year, we're going to, be conversing with our customers to create higher customer loyalty or retention. And so we're going to measure that by how many people are interacting with us on Twitter, how many people are posting or commenting on a post on our Facebook wall, that sort of thing. I've written out here some factors to consider. in addition to the perfect world kind of stuff, which is what are we trying to do and who's our market. Other factors that you need to consider and unfortunately be aware of, and a good strategy will take these into account, is start off with the preferences and comfort level of the people that you're working for. If you have to pass the strategy by a boss or get buy-in from other people, and your boss says to you, I read this article about Twitter and I think it's really good and we should be doing that. Don't ask why. Don't question them. Don't try to pull more information out. Just go with that. You know that you've got buy-in for at least one medium. So make sure your strategy includes Twitter unless you think it's a really bad idea. Also factor in internal policies if your business deals with compliance issues, or if you have policies for PR or marketing, make sure you're following them. But also the internal politics, the things that aren't written. You need to know, you might be given the role power and be told that this is your responsibility, but that might not be how the politics work out. If you're working on your own, different story. If you don't get along with yourself and have political issues, that's more than we can address here. Time and budget, as I mentioned, important. If you only have limited time, limited budget, you can't do all the crazy things that you want to. That's the biggest constraint that's going to reel you in and keep this social media strategy from going crazy. You want to think about risks. What could go wrong? What do we want to avoid? We want a strategy that avoids risk. Our goal is long-term engagement with your brand. At every step when you're developing a strategy, especially mapping it out, you're thinking, how can we make it more than just Twitter website to bouncing off my website? How can we get people to engage with my brand for as long as possible? And that might be across channels, that might be on a single channel, it might be on your website, it might be totally without your website being factored in. And then two more things. One is that you want to be liked, be found, and be known. Just thinking about those are helpful as you're developing a strategy. You're thinking, does this cover how people are going to find me? Does this cover a way of getting people to like me or like my brand? And does this come up with a way of people evangelizing for me or spreading my name? And then last of all, you want to consider your implementers. If you yourself are not going to be implementing the strategy, you need to think about who is and make sure that you're working on a level that they can actually implement. So to dive from that point, I want to give you some case studies. There's some examples to take this out of the purely theoretical level. And our first example is this solopreneur, as I talked about, a business consultant. And her objectives for the coming year when we met were to gain broader national exposure. She had a strong base locally, decided that she really wanted to go national. She's willing to fly places, spend time with your team. So she wanted that national exposure. She wanted to establish some thought leadership for herself, that she would become known in the field somewhat as someone that people would look to and basically read and care about her thoughts. And then she also kind of has a third and less important objective in the first year was to generate some leads, to get some people interested. So we said, okay, look at your time, in this case about half an hour a day, and what your budget is. And then also your market, which was C-level, like marketing directors or CCOs. And let's see where they are, and let's really focus on what we want to do. So we want national exposure, we want to establish thought leadership, we want to generate leads. Let's start with LinkedIn, because that's pretty helpful. $75 million users, one new user a second right now is the rate that they're adding people. The average household income of LinkedIn users is higher than the average household income of readers of Forbes magazine or New York Times. So the quality of people on LinkedIn is fantastic. And if you can be there and establish yourself with a reputation, if this person could, it would do really good things for her. So let's say she's meeting people in real life, but also people are finding her online through search on LinkedIn. What does she do with that attention that she's given? Well, in this case, we're going to move from LinkedIn to 2 places, because there's going to be people viewing her LinkedIn account that already know her, or maybe they met her at a mixer or some way in person. And so they already know about her website. So some people, though, don't know about her. So we want to give them the opportunity to learn more about her and where we're going. So we map out, okay, we really need 2 directions because we've got 2 different audiences here. One of them needs to learn about her and have the opportunity to hire her. But another has already met her, and they're really looking just at this point for further engagement. And so LinkedIn is really good at promoting a blog, because you can pull in the feed pretty easily. Every time you post a new blog, LinkedIn now allows you to add a link to your status updates. So that's a really good place to push people or encourage them. They find you on LinkedIn, it's all static information. Here's some dynamic information, my most recent blog post. So we push them to your blog. Okay, so they've wound up on these 2 places. What's our call to action? What are we trying to get them to do? What opportunity? How do we keep them engaged? The first one, when they're on the website, our key call to action is to get them to stay in touch. We know that the sales process is usually months long, so we're not going to get them to buy here. So we want to add them to the email list. And the main purpose of the email list is to teach. This is where she's giving away something of value. She's talking about team dynamics in the workplace and how they work. And little subtle information bits, just about once every 2 weeks. From the blog, let's just stick with this one actually. And so there's 2 things that we do in the email then. One is we encourage them to revisit the blog, because if you don't open every single one of these emails, you might open one a couple months after you've been to our website and signed up. We want to have the opportunity that you revisit her site. Maybe you're at the point where you're interested in hiring her for her services. Or if you're already on her list because you're a current client of hers, maybe you want to return to her website and you can be upsold on something. See what else she offers. The other thing that we want to do, if that's not for you, that's only going to be a segment of people who read her email. So we've got 75, 80, 90% of people who read her email, that's really not the call to action for. But let's just get them simply to like her on Facebook. And with Facebook, our real goal is staying top of mind. Because once they've liked her Facebook page, anytime she updates it, it's now appearing in their newsfeed, which people are seeing every single day. So she's not going to get a whole lot of engagement out of her audience, but for the people that do like her on Facebook, her brand name will just be on the surface all the time. If we return to the blog, where the whole goal is conversation, one thing she wants to do is, if you've discovered a blog, if you're a blog reader, good chance that you'll at least understand Twitter, have heard of Twitter. And so she wants to make sure the blog has an opportunity to connect with influencers. Her blog gives the opportunity to connect with her on Twitter, where the goal is for her to connect with influencers. On Twitter, you get a bio link. And a lot of people put that right to the homepage of their website. We didn't want to do that. We said, why are people finding her on Twitter? They found her on Twitter through a blog, for instance, or they found her from other people on Twitter. And this is really where they're interested in her thought leadership. They've discovered she has something interesting to say. They want to find more things she said that are interesting to say, or they want to stay in touch with her. So, for one thing, we're going to make sure that anytime she posts a new blog, that we're posting a link back to it with a question, where she's trying to engage people, because again, our goal here is to converse. So let's engage people before they've even seen her blog post. rather than just saying, here's the headline, here's the link, ask a question. If she's posting about team dynamics, have you faced a situation where your team, isn't getting along and that's inhibiting work at your workplace? So you would click there. Then we're going to use her bio link to push people to Facebook. If you're on Twitter, you're probably on Facebook. Again, let's stay top of mind here. Since we're using Facebook to stay top of mind, it's another good place to just use the opportunity to push people back to her blog. So now we've got kind of an ecosystem set up. But one thing it's not doing is really growing the audience. There's going to be some growth of the audience through Twitter, some through SEO on our website, but not quite enough. So one of the things we're going to do is we're going to guest blog. She's going to write blog entries for other people's blogs, which hit her target market. In exchange for that, when you write a guest blog, the blogger will usually give you the opportunity to put a bio line with a link. Again, another question, where does that link go? Do we put the link to her website? Well, do we really think that people who are discovering her for the first time on a guest blog have no idea who she is, but have read a short blog entry by her and found it interesting, are really ready to visit her website and consider hiring her? No, they're thinking of her as a content producer and as an individual, not as a company and a consultant. So we're going to draw people to our main focus here, again, LinkedIn. We're making the kind of odd choice of saying when you get a bio line, points back to your LinkedIn page. Because from there, they can discover who you are as a human being and make the choice of finding more of your content or finding more about your business. And then how do we populate all this with content? That's another question that comes up at this point. What are you blogging about? What are you tweeting about? If you're staying on top of mind on Facebook, where does that come from? Well, it turns out, and this is where some of the maximizing time and energy comes in, that she does regular speaking engagements. She has a separate agency that she works with where they book her to have speaking engagements. And so we said, great, you're generating content. And it turns out she does PowerPoints for all those presentations. So first of all, we're going to, each of those speeches that she gives can easily be broken down into multiple blog entries. She's got the content, she's got it thought out, all she has to do is write it. Second of all, she's got these PowerPoint slides. So let's post them onto SlideShare, which is another place to be found. And a benefit of SlideShare is that LinkedIn has an app for SlideShare that you can plug in and demonstrate a recent presentation that you've given. And we've got one more thing we thought about, which is that she sends out a lot of emails. And after she meets people, she tends to follow up with a personal email. So an email has a signature line, right? So how are we going to use that signature line in the most effective way? If you jam your signature line with 6 links to every single one of these things, no one's going to notice it. They're not going to click anything. So let's make a choice for them. And let's keep it simple and professional by having it do your website and your LinkedIn profile, because your LinkedIn profile has all the rest. So this is her email signature. And then this is the visual representation of her strategy. I'm just going to keep moving because I have 3 examples that kind of build on each other. The second one is an example of yeah.
I'm sorry, what was that last box up on the right?
Email signature. Yeah, sure thing. Any other questions?
Is the blog a separate web property with the website?
It is actually in this case, and that's a good question, because we chose that largely because for SEO purposes, for cross-linking, and then also because that was kind of outside the social media strategy piece, and also because we were able to get a really good relevant URL for that. So she kind of has two good URLs, one for our website, one for a blog. Yeah.
Do you use, ebooks or e-zines as any of your strategies? It seems like a natural offshoot of your PowerPoint presentations to be able to repackage content in ways that are easily digestible and it can be viewed kind of like white papers for whatever field she's in.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the one site that we typically use besides SlideShare is Scribd.
Yeah.
Are there others that you have in mind that you've used?
No, that Scribd is a good one. I just
So
SCRIB.
BD, yeah.
What is it?
It's basically for putting documents online. Mostly, most of them look like a PDF, but then there's all sorts of social features. It's kind of a network around content.
There are a few other publishing softwares that can actually help you package an ebook. But I think it's a good strategy for somebody like her. It's similar to how you're pushing the PowerPoint presentations out, but it actually, I think in some ways even elevates it to another level. Because it suddenly when people see that people have written a book or have a magazine published, that it takes and I don't know what kind of thought leader she is, but if she has a lot of stuff going on there that shows she is a thought leader. So.
Yeah, one thing that she's definitely not is a graphic designer, and one thing she doesn't have time for is laying things out attractively or paying someone to do so, which is why we kind of skipped that and said, let's go with blogs which format themselves, and with SlideShare where we've already created the presentation, because it's kind of time intensive. But you're totally right that putting it in a form that's even an ebook gives it kind of a gravity, steps it up a level. Another example, nextbook.com, they're actually located in my town, Lancaster, and they create online zines that they've managed to make very SEO friendly, but also very social. So you can point people to a particular page in a magazine that's online. You can bookmark it in Delicious and that sort of thing. So I definitely like both of those. So the next example that I want to give is it helps sometimes. You can see these start to get jumbled, and if we added another one, it would get even worse. So one of the things I've discovered is that it's very helpful to break apart structure and process, or structure and behavior, which, to give you a quick example of what I mean by that, structure would be, you've got your Twitter profile, and in this past example, you've got your Facebook page. A structure map would say, we're going to have it automatically cross-post when you post to Twitter, it posts to your Facebook page. But to the contrary, that's not really behavior. You don't want people who are following you on Twitter to click through to your Facebook page because they're seeing the same thing both places. So instead, your behavior map might look something like Twitter to blog and Facebook. So two different things. We're talking about how we're going to repurpose content here. Here we're talking about how we want users to move around. So to give you an example of the structure one, I want to talk about a software company that makes software for nonprofits. And their goal, their main objective was to create kind of a loose community for their customers and the people who use their products. These are nonprofits, they love the product. They also wanted to reduce their customer service costs and increase brand loyalty. And we said, well, those are good things. Those two kind of come out of the loose community. Build a community, self-supporting in terms of providing service, helping each other. So how are we going to do that? We don't really want to build a private network. What can we use out there? So the first thing we said, we've got to establish kind of a home base for these people, a tribe. And let's do that in as few places as possible. So we came up with a trifecta. We said the first thing that we're going to use is LinkedIn groups, which of course have subgroups and other features. And that's going to be a place for nonprofit executives and development officers to have relevant industry conversation. They can just talk about what's news in nonprofit. They can help each other with nonprofit things. We also want to be active on Twitter because we looked around at what their past experience was and saw that they had better engagement with their customers on Twitter than they did on Facebook. and also that they were more conversational. So this is going to be a place to attract people to the community, to build it, to make it more dynamic. And then we said, one thing that you're getting a lot of on LinkedIn and Twitter are these customer service requests. And there are great ways of making, dealing with with customer service requests and help questions that are social. And one of those platforms is Get Satisfaction. So we said we're going to set you up here for the focus on the product and the service. So keeping things dynamic, being conversational, attracting people because they're seeing the retweets and the conversation. Here, talking shop. Here, dealing with the product. And that's kind of a loose tribe for you. And one thing we're going to have to do over time as we're watching this is people are going to be likely to post questions on LinkedIn, and let's make sure that they are told this is the place to do it. Well then, so this is the structure for the community. How do we kind of keep that active? Well, the company has a blog, and they're pushing that out through Twitter. So blog's written, it's linked on Twitter. They create videos that help solve problems. And so that turns out to be great content to be reposted on the blog and written about. You embed the YouTube video, write a little bit about it. And then if we're going to use videos, let's use other video channels like 5min and Vimeo, which will be a great place for people to find your content. Only the relevant stuff. If it's particular to their product, there's no sense kind of syndicating it out there. But in this case, when you have a video that's just helpful to nonprofits, put that out there. And then we're going to link from those videos, which are aimed at people who don't know this product yet, to their traditional sales website. And note that that's the first time that website comes into the picture. The website, they initiate an order process or an inquiry process. They actually get a free trial. So there's a whole system of emails that go out after that. We've said, ultimately, let's make sure if someone buys the product, gets into the product, that they also get into the community by making sure that they're well linked to the LinkedIn group. And then let's not forget about your traditional marketing either. They go to a lot of trade shows where they interact with people and they do some print publications and ads and that sort of thing. So you're getting your leads from traditional shows, ads, and those should still link to your sales website. But especially for the trade shows, let's take that as an opportunity to tie Twitter to you. And when you're at a trade show, why not do a tweet up? Why not sponsor one? And that's the structural aspect of their social media strategy. Anyone have questions on that? Okay, I'm going to jump right on then to an example of a behavioral one by contrast. And this is for, again, a single person who works independently, this time as a business coach. These smaller examples are a little bit easier.
The one you just erased, I can't believe that you wouldn't have like a, let the LinkedIn group know the website. There's no line there?
The LinkedIn group is really for current users. Mm-hmm. So they're people who know about the site, who know the product. Mm-hmm. And members of the company themselves are active on the LinkedIn group. So a personal interaction is better than a website interaction. Mm-hmm. And then they're also being linked to the help section. Often the help section would be on the website. We put the help section on Get Satisfaction. So while the website's pretty salesy, it doesn't need to be so much.
Although aren't the most wonderful websites today doing all of that? You're thinking of the website as a static kind of sales.
In this case, we had the choice. We said we can put all these features onto your website, or we can use services that are out there where people already are, and that they're already using and comfortable with, and do that. And that's what we opted to do. We said we can build it. We can have a community without it being on your domain. Yeah.
So what are kind of the disadvantages of spreading all your content out, real content on different sites? You're not getting credit on your own domain for that, for search engine purposes.
Yeah, that's right. And in this case, we weren't too concerned about search engine because their main competitor is Microsoft Excel. So moving from that to a real database system is a jump and not something that people are looking at. It's all about referrals in the conversation. So in that case, we said, let's get out there, get our fingers in as many pies as possible, and be where people are and where they're using them already. So that's why we did that.
Do you put social links on the website and the blog, or only on the blog?
In this case, I mean, we only put the links as they are prescribed. So on the blog, we're only linking to Twitter. On the website, we're not actually linking them anywhere because none of these are set up for them. They're set up for current users who have issues or who want to collaborate with each other. So rather than saying, you've all seen the sites that have Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Jack and Jill, Hobo.com, and no one clicks on that because it's like, why? You see these in print ads. Fan us on Facebook. Why?
Do you have research that shows there's nobody's clicking on them, or nobody for this particular client is clicking on them?
Well,
Because this client doesn't have it on there. So
Yeah.
I'm just curious if there's something.
No, I'm obviously hyperbolizing when I say no one clicks on them. But this is not a real call to action. This is indecisiveness and trying to demonstrate how cool you are when you just have a whole bunch of links.
What about brand awareness?
What about brand awareness?
Building your brand and directing people to interact with your brand on those properties. That
Which one do you want to, where do you want them to interact and why? Do you try to sell 6 products at the same time? So why would you try to sell people on the concept of fanning you on 6 networks at the same time?
But people gravitate towards different, like I have a different conversation on Facebook versus Twitter, and when people come to my website, whether it's a product or whatever, if I have a preference, I want to see that my preference is listed. I don't think it's necessarily promoting 6 things. It's saying, I'm there for you in which site you want to interact with me on.
Yeah, as long as, there's cases certainly, I think personal blogs are a good example of
But
that.
brands too. I mean, if I see that a brand has Twitter, I immediately jump on that because Twitter is incredibly responsive. Whereas if Facebook's the next best thing, then I'll take that. But I like to see that they're there and that they're aware.
Yeah, if you're banking on people like you, who are in that mindset, then sure, that's a good strategy. These are strategic decisions you have to make. So that's why spelling these maps out is important. But if you're looking for people who are fed up with how many pages they get invited to fan on Facebook and don't know Twitter, then there's no purpose. Or if you're catching people who might be in the process of making a sales decision and you send them over to Twitter where you're just trying to build engagements, that's a wrong move because they were almost about to buy your product. So giving people too many options can be a really bad idea because you're not being intentional or strategic about where you're pushing them or where you're encouraging them to go. You're also not thinking about where their mindset is. If you're at a place where you're just being discovered by people and you want to say, find us elsewhere, yeah, I think that's perfectly fine. But I think in a lot of cases, that's not a fine strategy. Yeah.
And I was just going to say, the 2 examples you gave us are people trying to look for the C-suite, even the nonprofit, they're selling software,
Yeah.
or the chief information officer.
That's true.
So I don't know what your 3rd case study is, but maybe it'll.
Yeah, that's a really good point. In that we're not going after casual internet users. We're not building audience for a crafting blog, which would be very different.
Yeah, it's part of the reason why you wouldn't possibly put that on a homepage is kind of there's an assumption that every business has a Facebook fan page. Because almost all do. So
Yeah.
if you want to find them on Facebook, you go to Facebook to find them. You don't necessarily go to their website to find them. Is that what they're
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to say it. It's just like, if you're on Twitter and you look for them on Twitter, if you have people come to your site who would be interested in finding you on Twitter, let's find that out and get get that on there. That's a mistake. In my experience, there's a lot of websites that get lots of traffic that don't care about the fact they're on Twitter. Yeah.
I'm sorry if this question hijacks the rest of your show. It sounds, so far all of the examples that you've given have not been for websites that have e-commerce.
That's right.
And the website that I'm thinking about for social media mapping, it's an e-commerce site. So if people don't eventually get to that site, we have a problem.
Yeah, yeah.
Because you're not buying it through Facebook.
Well, you now have that option, and that's getting more and more attractive. I mean, there's a whole bunch of services, including one that I really like called ShopTab, that if your database is set up that it can work with Google products or Google Marketplace, which I really think I would recommend it be, you can automatically just take that database and dump it into ShopTab. If you go on Facebook and look at like Coke merchandise, you can buy Coca-Cola merchandise on Facebook. It's getting easier and easier. So first of all, that is pretty compelling to me to put that elsewhere. But that said, you're right. I'm very focused on more service providers than on e-commerce. But I also think e-commerce, you've got a lot of other. I think e-commerce is a little bit easier to strategize for. You might disagree because you're trying to figure it out. You can do a lot more of the traditional advertising, and SEO, and AdWords and that kind of thing. With a service, you're not. It's a longer sales process. So just like in the map of all these things around your website, that's a good point. In that, with a service provider, you're fine with people just kind of like hanging out up here and then eventually connecting with you. With e-commerce, you want to get them to your site to buy as soon as possible. So that's a good distinction. We might want to add that stipulation. Any other questions or insights? Anyone else have a response to that question about e-commerce? Okay, well, unfortunately, my last situation is, again, a service provider. But this is an example of where we deviate from strategy or from structure to behavior process, where we're talking about here at Business Coach. And I actually developed a series of maps for this person, because one thing that you want to do is, in the sales process, you might want to look at how a strategy for each piece of the process. So for people to go from unaware to aware, aware to interested, interested to having the desire, having the desire to purchase, purchasing to becoming an evangelist. Looking at this as one thing can be overwhelming sometimes. So it can be helpful instead to just look at one slice of these. So this is an example of where we looked at one slice and said, if we mapped the behavior of users, how would they get from here to here using social media? How would they get from being someone that is a connection that you've met in real life or online to being someone you can now claim that you really have a relationship with? So for there we said, again, we're returning to LinkedIn. And on LinkedIn we have a few different things.
And what kind of company was this again?
This is a business coach.
A business coach.
So if we, in some maps it's handy to show a single channel with a single box or something like that, but in others it's helpful to break it out. And so in this case we're breaking it out. We're just saying everything here has to do with LinkedIn. And the main things we're going to focus on in this process of moving people from someone who's a connection to someone who's a real relationship. Things that we've got here, we've got your status updates to work with, we've got groups that you participate in, we've got the fact, are they actually connected to you? Have you invited them to connect with you on LinkedIn? And you've also have your recommendations on your profile. The profile is going to be interesting, the static information, but it's really the recommendations that are going to make it shine. So what we identified was that there's 2 points of entry here on LinkedIn for someone that's just a connection. And one might be that Graham, after meeting them, gets the business card, connects with them online, says, okay, will you connect with me on LinkedIn? They say sure, they check out his profile, and sure enough, what do they see? They see his recommendations. and that's a positive thing for him. That means they're going to pay more attention to him on LinkedIn. They're also going to see his status update. Same for people that discover him through his participation in groups. These are focus groups targeted towards his target market. And so his status message is going to contain a link to his most recent blog post.
Do you help him find those focus groups?
Yeah, and in this case, he actually had some where he was happy with LinkedIn, like participating there, like being in groups, and so that's another factor I didn't really talk about, but he liked that and was comfortable with it and knew some groups that he wanted. But it's mostly a process of sifting. You can find the groups that are active and have your target. It's just you have to go through a bunch that don't first, that are inactive or don't have your target. And in his case too, he's pretty locally focused, unlike the other example that I used first. So ones that have a local focus were much more relevant to him and therefore easier to find. So then we go to the to his blog. And in this case, the blog is hosted on the same site as a static site. And so we said, well, once they get to your blog, what are we going to do? How are we going to really know that we formed a relationship? Well, one thing we can do is if they leave a comment, that's really a good sign that they're interacting with you. Now it's a two-way relationship. So we're going to count that as a win. If they just click the like button, which is a Facebook like button, we're going to count that as a win. And we're also going to count if they visit your blog and then look at the rest of the static information on your site and sign up for your email address. Now you have a way to get in contact with them on their terms. And so we're going to count that as a win too. You've established a relationship. So this strategy does go on, but we're nearing our closing time, and I promise we'll get out of here on time. So I'm going to stop there and ask if anyone has any further questions. Just one last thing is that complementary documents to this, so I don't see diagrams as being the complete answer on their own. I want to make that clear. Documents that go along with it, however you do your diagram, would be a written document that includes who your target is, what your objectives are, what your strategy, tactic, and measurements are. That needs to be written out. The really nice thing is to have an editorial calendar to say, okay, this is how it works over time, in the long term, this is what we're going for. But how am I going to implement that into the next 3 months? So actually take a calendar and say, on this day I want to do this, on this day I do this. You don't have to follow those exactly, but just saying, I can spread this out into time. So maybe every Tuesday I devote to connecting with people on LinkedIn. Every Thursday I write a blog post. Twice a month I send out an email to my list. Things like that. That makes it more digestible. It puts it in the element of time. Depending on the size of your organization and your situation, you may want a social media policy, guidelines that say what's okay, what's not. It's a good idea, even if you're on your own, to have a crisis plan. If you're doing anything in social media, things can go wrong, and it's a bad idea to figure out what you're going to do in those situations when it arises instead of beforehand, especially if you're an institution with a real brand to protect. And then, lastly, you may need for some things a submap. If your whole, let's say the comments here that we're going to use, this is just a link of ones that I like to look at. If we're going to use Discuss or Intense Debate, which is a commenting program, or a service, we might want a sub-map here that just shows how the comment system works. So that's how I put that. And then, this list too is just something that I use. What I use is Brian Solis has a diagram called the Conversation Prism, and that just shows very neatly a lot of the major social media platforms out right now. And so as I'm doing the maps, I'll look at those to see if I missed anything.
What does TOS do?
TOSTM there, what does that stand for?
Oh, target, objectives, strategies, tactics, and measurements. And that's kind of a classical.
If I just did a Google search on Brian Solis, that'll show
Yeah,
up.
you'll find that. Yeah. It's a pretty popular thing, so you can even do an image search and you'll find it. Any other final thoughts for anyone else? Or questions?
Is there any way, like, if you want to do paid content, you do that with Stripe? Like, if you want to do a localization, you have like a team or something?
Where you had paid,
Like, if you wanted to turn your, like, your PowerPoint to like a little class or something, just like a tablet, like Firefox or something, can you do that with Scribe, or is that all free content, or?
I don't know how Script works in that sense. I don't think they have that capability, but I know a number of other platforms do. One of them that I recently looked at, that's kind of okay, is Udoo. So that might be one you want to look at. All right, well, we'll allow the whole group to come on in, and thanks for your participation and your time. Appreciate it.